Throughout the ages, there have been many well-known fictional characters who were Catholic. G.K. Chesterton's Father Brown, Father Mulcahy from MASH, and Bing Crosby's character from The Bells of St. Mary's, Father O'Malley. In addition to these priests, there are also Frere Jacques from the rhyme of the same name, Don Quixote, and the various characters from Canterbury Tales. But one fictional folk hero who was decidedly Catholic at his origin, but whose Catholicism has been eroded through the ages, is none other than Robin Hood. In this episode, I'll trek back to the original Catholic roots of this hero of Sherwood Forest.
The dogma lives loudly within you.
But I feel that the greatest destroyer of peace today is abortion.
Make one thing certain, that you keep always close to God.
You've embarked on a Catholic history trek.
Perhaps the earliest direct mention of Robin Hood by name is a 1377 work by William Langland titled Piers Plowman. In the poem, Langland wrote, "I know not perfectly my Pater Noster, as the priest sings it, but I know my rhymes of Robin Hood and Ranulph, Earl of Chester." Two of the best-known early works which feature Robin Hood are A Guest of Robin Hood and Robin Hood and the Monk, both of which date to the early 1400s. In A Guest of Robin Hood, the tale is recounted of a poor knight who Robin and his crew invite to dinner. During the dinner, Robin learns the knight is destitute because his neighbors robbed him, and he had to borrow £400 from a rich abbot of St. Mary's Abbey to bail his son out of prison. The unnamed knight had 1 year to repay the abbot or forfeit his inherited lands to the monk. Robin clothes and feeds the knight, and then lends him £400 to repay the abbot, a debt that is due pretty soon. As it turns out, the abbot is corrupt and is disappointed in the knight repaying the debt, as he had hoped to acquire the knight's property. This is a common theme in the Robin Hood stories, fighting against corruption in the church. This oldest of Robin Hood stories isn't as tame as the 1973 Walt Disney cartoon version. In this Guest of Robin Hood, Robin and his men shoot and rob a monk, a dishonest one, mind you, kill the sheriff of Nottingham, deceive the king, and at the end of the poem, Robin is killed through the foul play of a prioress and a knight. Of particular interest is the faith of Robin Hood. In A Guest of Robin Hood, he's a pious Catholic with a strong devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, and due to his love of her, he would never do harm to any company which had a woman. And in the story, it is after the poor knight describes his devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary that Robin then clothes him and provides him the £400. And at the end of the tale, Robin pleads with the king to give him leave that he may go to a chapel he had built, which he needed to visit barefoot and with a hair shirt, as to do penance for his sins. In the story Robin Hood and the Monk, as in A Guest of Robin Hood, the Catholic faith and devotion of Robin Hood comes through, this time even more clearly. The story begins on Whitsun early in a May morning. Whitsun is the old name for the Feast of Pentecost, which occurs 7 weeks after Easter. It can be as early as mid-May or as late as early June, depending on the date of Easter. Robin and Little John invoke Him that died on a tree, meaning Christ. And at one point in Robin Hood and the Monk comes the line, "Ye on thing grieves me," said Robin, "and does my heart much woo, that I may not no solemn day to mass nor matins go." Basically, Robin is troubled that on the Feast of Pentecost, he's unable to attend matins, which is one of the 4 canonical hours, or attend Mass. He then resolves by the might of the Blessed Virgin Mary to travel to Nottingham to attend Mass. Robin is a wanted man and sought after by the corrupt sheriff of Nottingham. So, upon reaching the town, Robin prays to God and Mary that he may safely leave the town after Mass. After he reaches St. Mary's Church, the pace of the story begins in earnest. A corrupt monk alerts the sheriff, who storms into the church with his men, 12 of whom are killed by Robin's sword before he's captured. After the arrest, Little John comforts Robin's men by assuring them that because Robin has served Our Lady so well, through her intercession, no wicked death will befall Robin. Although Little John then prays that Mary will intercede to bring the downfall of the wicked monk, which does happen a bit later when John catches up to him, throws him off his horse, and beheads him. Little John, or perhaps better titled Bloody John, then gets the sheriff drunk and stabs the jailer to free Robin. The story of Robin Hood and the Monk follows a popular prose which was known as The Miracles of Our Lady, in which knights who had been imprisoned by their enemies were delivered by the intercession of the Virgin. The Catholicism of Robin Hood was manifest in these as well as many other tales and adventures. Even a children's nursery rhyme captures his faith, describing him praying the rosary. That rhyme included the phrase, Robin Hood, telling his beads, all in the greenwood among the green weeds. Telling his beads was his praying of the rosary, and Robin Hood would have lived at the same time as St. Dominic, who's often credited with the rosary. Be sure to check out episode 77 for a detailed history of the rosary. Another obvious Catholic connection is the addition of the company's chaplain, Friar Tuck. The earliest tales of Robin Hood do not mention the rotund, lively Franciscan, who seemingly loved his ale and his fighting as much as he loved God. But there's a reason for this. The Franciscans did not yet even exist when Robin Hood was said to have lived. During the reign of King Richard the Lionheart, St. Francis didn't form the Order of Friars Minor until a decade after King Richard's death, and it was another 15 years before the first Franciscans reached the shores of England. But in the 15th century, such historical details didn't prevent the inclusion of a Franciscan in the tales of Robin Hood. He first appears in Robin Hood and the Sheriff of Nottingham from the mid-1470s, and is featured in Robin Hood and Friar Tuck from the mid-16th century, although he's only named in the title, a title that was later renamed to Robin Hood and the Curtail Friar. By the time Sir Walter Scott wrote Ivanhoe in the 19th century, the friar had become a crucial member of Robin's band of outlaws. The friar was said to have hailed from Fountains Abbey, a Cistercian house founded in 1132 in West Yorkshire, so it's possible that the Friar Tuck character was originally a Cistercian who later became a Franciscan. Some speculate that Friar Tuck originated as a character from the May Games, which were village festivals of the era, and as the Robin Hood plays became the predominant attraction of the May Games, Tuck may have been worked into the script. But others contend that Tuck may have been based on a real person, either Robin of Knaresborough or Robert Stafford. In 1417, Robert Stafford was a priest-turned-bandit who began to use the pseudonym Friar Tuck, apparently well before it was popularly used in Robin Hood lore. And Robin of Knaresborough was an early 13th century hermit who was made an outlaw by King John under the accusation of sheltering thieves and runaways. Not only was he known for raising money to redeem prisoners, and for his willingness to defy unjust authority, but he's also linked to Fountains Abbey, which is where the stories placed Friar Tuck, and the given name of Robert's father was Tuck. With the rise of Protestantism in England, not only were Catholic lives, relics, churches, and abbeys in danger of being destroyed, but so were Catholic heroes of folklore. Robin Hood's Catholicism was no longer welcome in Protestant England, but he was too popular for the crown to eliminate entirely. So the stories were modified to become more favorable to the new anti-Catholic culture. Robin's attacks against corrupt churchmen were spun into attacks against the Catholic Church herself. And most notably, Robin Hood's devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary was replaced with devotion to a new character, Maid Marian, who inherited many of her pure qualities from the original Mary of the stories, from whom she also inherited her name. It's also been said that recusant Catholics were derided under the derogatory label of Robin Hoods to describe them as outlaws faithful to the original Church of Christ over the new Church of England. I've mentioned a couple possibilities for the inspiration of Friar Tuck and the obvious inspiration of Maid Marian from the real-life Blessed Virgin Mary, but what about Robin Hood? Was Robin Hood based on a real person? Earlier in this episode, I mentioned the line from the poem Piers Plowman. I know not perfectly my Pater Noster as the priest sings it, but I know the rhymes of Robin Hood and Ranulph, Earl of Chester. Ranulph de Blondeville was a real person. He was the 6th Earl of Chester and went on the 5th Crusade. He was involved in the politics of the crown, loyal to King Richard over the usurper, Prince John. This places Ranulph with the same characters and the same time frame as Robin Hood. So it's quite possible that Robin Hood may have also been a real person. If he was, There are several popular candidates. One is Robert Hod, later called Hobahod. Robert Hod was a tenant of the Archbishop of York, who Robin Hood fought against in early ballads. Plus, Robert Hod also had a very similar name. Another pair of candidates were Robert de Ville and Roger Godberd, both of whom were followers of Simon de Montfort, Earl of Leicester, who was the son of the Simon de Montfort who led the crusade against the Albigensian heresy. The Earl was leading the barons' second war against the King of England, seeking to uphold the political rights granted to the barons under the Magna Carta, signed half a century earlier. Following the crushing defeat of the rebellion in 1265, both these men became outlaws and escaped into the forest. It said Godberd lived in Sherwood Forest, had a band of men at his call, and even tussled with the Sheriff of Nottingham. A final candidate is Fulk Fizz Warren III, a childhood friend of the future King John. After the two men later had a falling out, the king dispossessed Fulk of his family castle and gave it to another. Apparently unhappy with this turn of events, Fulk killed the new inhabitant of his castle and was forced to hide out in Shropshire Forest as an outlaw. Who Robin Hood is based on will likely always remain a matter of speculation. He's most likely an amalgamation of several people whose original adventures were embellished into various tales over the past 7 centuries. Protestant England made the devoutly Catholic Robin Hood into an anti-Catholic bandit. Modern shows and movies have distorted him into an irreligious and even pagan thief. But the real Robin Hood was a deeply pious Catholic folk hero who is known to hold a strong devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary and pray his rosary, attend Mass at risk of imprisonment, keep a close friendship with a monk, oppose church corruption, and remain loyal to a Catholic monarch on crusade against infidels, even to the point of taking to the woods to escape imprisonment. To help the Real Catholic History Trek preserve the real Robin Hood, please consider rating, reviewing, sharing, and subscribing to Catholic History Trek. As always, we end each episode in a prayer in the Church's historic language of Latin, the same language which Robin would have used when he was telling his beads. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut erat in principio et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen.
Thank you for listening to Catholic History Trek. You can reach us at catholichistorytrek@gmail.com.